A late-night traffic stop in Arlington, Virginia takes a shocking turn when Officer Bradley Simmons pulls over Olivia Carter, a composed, intelligent black woman with a quiet intensity that doesn't match the typical profile of the suspect. What should have been a routine stop quickly spirals out of control when Simmons finds drugs in Olivia's trunk, drugs she swears weren't there before. But Olivia isn't just any ordinary citizen. Because Olivia Carter is a U.S. Air Force intelligence officer, and she's about to expose a dangerous criminal network that stretches deep into the military, the government, and beyond. As Olivia digs deeper, she discovers that Simmons isn't just a dirty cop. He's part of a highly organized operation, one controlled by powerful figures with deep ties to the Department of Defense. With the help of federal agents Mitchell and Davis, Olivia sets a trap, using herself as bait to unravel the conspiracy from the inside. But when the plan starts to fall apart and dangerous secrets are revealed, Olivia finds herself facing a ruthless enemy who will stop at nothing to protect the system they built. Corruption runs deep. Loyalties will be tested. And when the truth comes out, no one will be left untouched. If you're ready to uncover the truth, stay tuned, because this story is about to get intense. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell so you don't miss a single update. And let us know in the comments, where you're watching from. We'd love to hear from you. Now, let's get into it. The soft hum of streetlights buzzed in the background as Olivia Carter drove through the quiet suburban streets of Arlington, Virginia. The night was calm, the roads nearly empty, but the tension in her chest told a different story. Olivia's hands gripped the steering wheel tightly, her sharp brown eyes flicking toward the rearview mirror for the third time in as many minutes. A pair of headlights followed closely behind her. She took a steady breath. "It's nothing," she told herself. "Stay calm." She slowed as she approached an intersection, the dull glow of a stop sign reflecting off her windshield. She came to a complete stop, counted to 3, and then pressed the gas. The headlights behind her did the same. Damn it! Blue and red lights flashed in the darkness. The wail of a siren cut through the stillness of the night like a knife. Olivia's heart hammered in her chest, but her hands remained steady as she pulled the car to the side of the road. The squad car stopped behind her. The lights reflected off her rearview mirror, casting harsh red and blue patterns across her face. Olivia's breathing slowed as she mentally prepared herself. A tall, broad-shouldered officer stepped out, his polished boots clicking on the asphalt as he approached her window. He had the commanding posture of someone accustomed to getting his way. His badge gleamed under the streetlight. Officer Bradley Simmons. He tapped the window. Olivia rolled it down with deliberate calmness. "License and registration," Simmons said, his voice clipped. His pale blue eyes raked over her face, cold and assessing. Olivia offered a polite smile. "May I ask why I was stopped, officer?" "You failed to stop at that sign back there," Simmons replied without blinking. Olivia's brow creased slightly. "I'm fairly certain I came to a full stop." Simmons' eyes narrowed. His hand settled on the handle of his holstered weapon. "License and registration, ma'am." She hesitated for half a second before opening the glove compartment and retrieving the documents. Her fingers brushed against the cool metal edge of a small key hidden beneath the papers. A key that most people wouldn't give a second glance, but Olivia knew better. It was no ordinary key. Simmons studied her license with detached scrutiny. "Virginia address." "Local." "Yes." "You live alone?" Olivia's gaze sharpened. Why was he asking that? "I don't see how that's relevant," she replied calmly. Simmons' lips twitched into a faint smirk. He handed the license back without answering. Behind him, another officer emerged from the squad car. Officer Mark Riley, shorter and stockier than Simmons. He gave Olivia a once-over and then circled toward the back of her car. Simmons leaned down, popped the trunk. Olivia's smile remained, but her pulse quickened. "I don't consent to a search." Simmons' eyes hardened. "You can either cooperate, or I'll have probable cause in about 10 seconds. She met his gaze evenly. "I know my rights." "I don't think you do," Simmons growled. "Step out of the vehicle." Olivia's fingers curled around the steering wheel. "Am I under arrest?" "We can make it official if you'd like." Simmons' hand was already reaching toward his handcuffs. Riley was standing behind the car now, shining his flashlight into the trunk. "Hey, Simmons," Riley called. "You might want to take a look at this." Simmons straightened. Olivia's pulse jumped. She hadn't put anything in the trunk. She was sure of it. Simmons opened the trunk. Olivia's sharp eyes followed his movement through the side mirror. Riley held up a small plastic bag. "What do you know?" Riley said. "Looks like someone's been transporting a little something extra." It was a bag of white powder. Olivia's jaw tightened. "That's not mine," she said coldly. Simmons' smirk widened. "Well, it's in your trunk, and that makes it yours. I don't know how it got there." "Sure you don't." Before Olivia could respond, Simmons reached for her wrist. "You're under arrest," he said smoothly. "I have the right to." "You'll get your rights once we get to the station," Simmons interrupted. Her instinct screamed at her to fight. But Olivia forced herself to remain calm. They were making a mistake, one that would cost them dearly. But not yet. Simmons tightened the handcuffs around her wrists and led her toward the squad car. Riley gave her a mocking grin as he opened the back door. "Get in." Olivia's dark eyes gleamed under the streetlight. "They have no idea who I am." She slid into the back seat without resistance. The door slammed shut behind her. The ride to the station was quiet. Simmons and Riley sat in the front, laughing under their breath. Olivia's gaze drifted toward the window as the city lights blurred past. Her handcuffs were tight, digging into the delicate skin on her wrists. "You don't seem too worried," Simmons remarked, glancing at her through the rearview mirror. "I've been in worse situations," Olivia replied smoothly. Simmons chuckled. "That's so." "Yes." Riley turned around, eyeing her carefully. "What do you do for a living?" Olivia smiled faintly. "Consultant." "Consultant?" Riley scoffed. "Sounds like a cover for something." Olivia met his gaze evenly. "You could say that." When they arrived at the station, Simmons led her through the cold, sterile halls. His hand on her arm was unnecessarily firm. Olivia's eyes swept the station, noting the security cameras, the number of officers, and the exit points. They led her into a processing room. Simmons pushed her toward the fingerprint scanner. "Place your hand on the pad." She did. The machine beeped. A moment later, the attending officer glanced at a screen. His brow creased. "Is there a problem?" Simmons asked. The officer hesitated. Sir?" "Her record's locked." Simmons frowned. "What do you mean, locked?" The officer tapped the keyboard again. "I can't access it. It's flagged by the Department of Defense." Simmons' jaw tightened. "Override it." The officer shook his head. "I can't. Clearance level is too high." Olivia's gaze sharpened. A slow, dangerous smile curled her lips. Simmons turned toward her, his smile fading. "What the hell is going on?" Olivia leaned toward him, her expression calm but cutting. "I'd be very careful about what you do next, Officer Simmons." "And why is that?" "Because the Department of Defense doesn't just lock files for anyone." Simmons' eyes darkened. "I'm going to enjoy watching you squirm," he sneered. Olivia smiled. "You won't have to wait long." The cold steel of the handcuffs bit into Olivia Carter's wrists as Officer Simmons led her down a dimly lit hallway toward the holding cells. His grip on her arm was unnecessarily tight, his jaw set with an air of satisfaction that made Olivia's stomach turn. She had seen that expression before, the look of someone convinced they had already won. But Simmons was wrong. The station was sterile and outdated, the walls a dull shade of gray, the flicker of fluorescent lights creating an irritating buzz overhead. Officers milled around, some typing reports, others talking over paper cups of coffee. Their eyes trailed after Olivia, curiosity gleaming in their expressions. "Looks like Simmons caught himself a big one," one officer murmured. "About time," another chuckled. Simmons marched Olivia toward an empty holding cell, his smirk widening as he opened the heavy metal door. "Inside," he said. Olivia held his gaze for a long moment. Then, without a word, she stepped into the cell. The door clanged shut behind her. She stood at the center of the small, dim room, her back straight. The scent of stale sweat and disinfectant lingered in the air. A narrow metal bench stretched across the far wall. She could hear the low murmur of voices from beyond the bars. Simmons lingered outside the cell, his smirk still in place. You don't seem too worried, he said. I'm not, Olivia replied coolly. Simmons' eyes narrowed. That's so. Olivia's smile was faint, almost polite. Yes. Before Simmons could respond, Officer Riley approached. He leaned against the bars, arms crossed over his chest, his eyes cold. I think we need to have a little conversation, Riley said. About what? Olivia asked. Riley's gaze sharpened. About that bag of cocaine in your trunk. Planted evidence is a serious offense, Olivia replied calmly. Simmons scoffed. You've got a smart mouth, lady. I've been told, Olivia said. Simmons unlocked the cell door. Get up. She didn't move. Am I being charged? We're still deciding, Simmons replied. But I wouldn't get too comfortable. He stepped aside, gesturing toward the hallway. Olivia rose to her feet and walked past him without a word. She followed Riley down the hall toward an interrogation room. Inside, the room was as bleak as the rest of the station. Plain gray walls, a single metal table, and 2 chairs. A camera sat in the corner, its red light blinking faintly. Sit, Simmons ordered. Olivia sat, her posture straight, hands folded in her lap. Simmons dropped a file onto the table and sat across from her. Riley stood near the door, arms crossed. Simmons opened the file and spread out a series of photographs. Pictures of the bag of cocaine in her trunk, shots of her standing outside her car, and the printed record of her arrest. This looks bad for you, Simmons said. Olivia glanced at the photos. Does it? Simmons' eyes darkened. Possession with intent to distribute. That's a felony charge. That's assuming the drugs were mine, Olivia replied smoothly. Simmons leaned forward. No one's going to believe you. I wouldn't be so sure. And why is that? Olivia smiled faintly. Because you planted them. Simmons' eyes flashed. Careful, lady. I'm just speaking the truth, Olivia replied evenly. Simmons stood abruptly. His hands pressed flat against the table as he leaned toward her. You think you're smarter than me? I don't think that, Olivia said. I know that. Simmons' hand twitched toward his holster. Riley noticed and stepped forward. She's trying to rattle you, Riley muttered. She's succeeding, Olivia added. Simmons' jaw clenched. You don't know who you're messing with. No, Olivia said. You don't. Simmons straightened. His gaze sharpened. Who the hell are you? A long silence stretched between them. Then Olivia leaned back slightly, her dark eyes gleaming. You'll find out soon enough. 15 minutes later, Simmons and Riley sat in the observation room behind the two-way glass. Olivia sat alone at the table in the interrogation room, perfectly still, her face calm. What the hell is wrong with her? Riley muttered. She's too relaxed. Simmons' gaze hardened. She's playing us. Then why can't we find anything on her? Riley asked. That lock on her file, it's military-grade encryption. What kind of civilian has that level of security clearance? Simmons' lips curled. Maybe she's not a civilian. Riley's eyes narrowed. You think she's federal? She's something. Riley stood. I'm going to run another background check. Don't bother, Simmons replied darkly. What? Simmons' gaze sharpened. This isn't going through normal channels. Outside the station, a black SUV pulled to a stop in front of the station. The windows were tinted, the license plates unmarked. 2 men stepped out, dark suits, crisp ties, and the unmistakable air of authority. Their movements were sharp and efficient. One of them pulled out a phone and dialed a number. Tell the director we've located her, the man said. He ended the call and nodded toward the station entrance. Let's go. Back in the interrogation room, Simmons opened the door and stepped inside. You've got visitors, he said. Olivia's gaze sharpened. Do I? Simmons smirked. Let's see how long that smile lasts. A moment later, the 2 men from the SUV stepped into the room. One of them was tall, his silver hair clipped neatly back. The other, shorter and more muscular, had the kind of blank expression that suggested he had seen more than most men. Simmons folded his arms. And who are you? The taller man pulled a leather wallet from his coat and flipped it open, revealing a badge. Agent Mitchell, Defense Intelligence Agency. Simmons' smirk faded. The shorter man leaned toward Olivia. Agent Carter, he said smoothly. We've been trying to reach you. Simmons' head snapped toward Olivia. Agent. Olivia's gaze sharpened. Mitchell smiled thinly. Shall we discuss this in private? Simmons' face darkened. She's in our custody. Not anymore, Mitchell replied smoothly. Simmons stepped forward. On what grounds? Federal authority, Mitchell said. She's classified under Section 9 of the Department of Defense. Simmons' mouth opened, but no sound came out. Olivia rose to her feet. I think I'll be going now. The shorter agent stepped towards Simmons. Your mistake was bringing her in here at all. You planted evidence, Mitchell said, his smile fading. That's a serious crime. Simmons' face flushed red. You can't prove that. Oh, Olivia said, but I can. She reached into her jacket pocket and pulled out a small recording device. She placed it on the table and pressed a button. Simmons' voice crackled through the speaker. You think anyone's going to believe you? Simmons' face paled. You're finished, Olivia said coldly. Mitchell smiled faintly. We'll be in touch. Olivia turned toward Simmons, her gaze razor sharp. You made a mistake, Olivia said softly. Now it's going to cost you. She walked toward the door. Mitchell and his partner followed. Simmons stood frozen, his fists clenched. Who the hell are you? Simmons growled. Olivia's smile was faint, sharp as a blade. You'll find out soon enough. A cool wind brushed against Olivia Carter's face as she stepped out of the police station. The night was still, the distant sound of traffic humming softly through the empty streets. The two DI agents, Mitchell and his silent partner, flanked her like shadows. The black SUV was parked at the curb, engine running. Mitchell opened the door for her. After you, he said. Olivia hesitated. Her sharp eyes flicked toward Mitchell. Where are we going? Mitchell's smile was thin. Director's orders. We need to debrief you. Olivia slid into the back seat. Mitchell and his partner followed, closing the doors behind them. The driver, expressionless behind the wheel, pulled the SUV away from the curb and into the night. The interior of the vehicle was dim, the hum of the engine blending with the faint hiss of the air conditioning. Olivia leaned back, her hands resting lightly on her knees. Mitchell's gaze drifted toward her. You handled yourself well in there. I've been trained, Olivia replied. You certainly have, Mitchell said, his tone laced with curiosity. I wasn't expecting backup, Olivia said. You weren't supposed to need it, Mitchell replied smoothly. But once we saw Simmons' name on the report, we knew it was only a matter of time before things went sideways. Olivia's gaze sharpened. Simmons is known to you? Mitchell's mouth curled into a humorless smile. More than you know. The SUV turned off the main road, heading toward a private airfield on the outskirts of town. A low chain-link fence lined the perimeter, topped with razor wire. Beyond the fence, a private jet sat on the tarmac, its exterior gleaming under the floodlights. Olivia's brows lifted slightly. Going somewhere? Mitchell smiled. Debriefing's been moved to Washington. The SUV stopped near the jet. Mitchell's partner opened the door and gestured toward the steps leading to the aircraft. Olivia stepped out into the crisp night air. I don't remember this being standard procedure, she said. Mitchell's smile widened. It's not. Olivia's gaze narrowed. What's going on, Mitchell? Mitchell's expression darkened. You made Simmons nervous. I'd say that's a win, Olivia replied. Mitchell shook his head. You don't understand. Simmons isn't just a dirty cop. He's connected. To who? Mitchell's gaze sharpened. That's what we need to find out. 30 minutes later, the jet climbed smoothly through the night sky, the distant lights of the city vanishing beneath the blanket of darkness. Olivia sat across from Mitchell in the spacious cabin, her arms folded across her chest. A file lay open between them. Photographs, names, reports. Olivia's sharp eyes scanned the documents with military precision. Captain Bradley Simmons, Mitchell said, tapping a photo of Simmons in uniform. Decorated officer. Commendations for bravery. Clean record. And yet he's dirty, Olivia replied. Mitchell nodded. Simmons is connected to a network inside law enforcement. Internal Affairs has been investigating him for months. Bribery, intimidation, evidence tampering. But every time they get close, the case disappears. Someone's protecting him, Olivia said. Not just someone. Mitchell leaned forward. Simmons is part of a larger operation. We think it extends beyond the department, possibly into federal agencies. Olivia's eyes darkened. How deep? We don't know yet. Olivia's gaze sharpened. What's my role in this? Mitchell's expression turned serious. We think Simmons targeted you for a reason. Someone knew who you were. They wanted to test your reaction. What? To see if you were a threat. Olivia's lips curled into a dangerous smile. They miscalculated. Mitchell's eyes gleamed with approval. We need to use that. Ow! We've planted a leak, Mitchell said. Word is out that you're cooperating with the investigation. We want Simmons to react, to show his hand. You're using me as bait, Olivia said. Precisely. Olivia's gaze turned cold. What if Simmons decides to make a move? Mitchell smiled faintly. That's where you come in. 2 days later, Olivia stood in front of a small coffee shop on the corner of a busy Washington street. The air was crisp, the scent of fresh brewed coffee mingling with the morning chill. Her dark hair was pulled into a low bun, her sunglasses shielding her sharp gaze from curious eyes. She wasn't waiting for coffee. She was waiting for Simmons. Her earpiece crackled. Eyes on target, Mitchell's voice said at her ear. Across the street, Simmons' squad car pulled to a stop. He stepped out, wearing civilian clothes, jeans, and a leather jacket. His expression was hard, calculating. Olivia's jaw tightened. Let's see how far you're willing to go. Simmons crossed the street. Olivia's stance didn't shift. He stopped a few feet away from her. Well, Simmons said. Fancy seeing you here. Olivia smiled faintly. Just getting some coffee. Simmons' gaze sharpened. We need to talk. I don't think so. Simmons stepped closer. You made a mistake. Did I? You don't know who you're messing with, Simmons said darkly. I think I do, Olivia replied smoothly. Simmons' eyes darkened. His hand twitched toward his jacket. Olivia's gaze sharpened. I know about the network, Olivia said softly. The money, the bribes, the disappearances. Simmons' jaw tightened. Careful. Or what? Simmons' hand slid into his jacket. Olivia's body tensed. I don't think you want to do that, she said. And why not? Because you're not alone. Simmons' gaze flicked toward the alley. Mitchell's partner stepped into view, his hand resting on the grip of a holstered weapon. Across the street, a black SUV was parked at the curb. Mitchell leaned against the door, his eyes cold. Simmons' face twisted in frustration. You've been made, Olivia said. You don't have proof, Simmons said. I don't need proof, Olivia replied. You just told me everything I need to know. Simmons' hand tensed inside his jacket. Olivia's gaze sharpened. You want to pull that trigger? Olivia said. Go ahead, but I promise you, you won't make it out of this alive. Simmons' breathing quickened. His eyes darted toward Mitchell's partner, toward the SUV. Slowly, his hand slid out of his jacket. You made a mistake, Olivia said. Simmons' jaw clenched. We'll see about that. You're going to answer for this, Olivia said. All of it. Simmons smiled faintly. I don't answer to you. No, Olivia said. You answer to the system. And I am the system. Simmons' eyes darkened. He stepped back toward the squad car. You've made some powerful enemies, Simmons said. So have you, Olivia replied. Simmons' gaze lingered for a moment. Then he turned and slid in the squad car. The engine rumbled to life. The car pulled away from the curb and disappeared into traffic. Mitchell's partner stepped toward Olivia. Think he'll run? Olivia smiled coldly. No. Mitchell's voice crackled in her ear. Nice work. This isn't over, Olivia said. Not even close, Mitchell replied. The hum of the fluorescent lights in the briefing room was grating, adding a sharp edge to the tension that already filled the air. Olivia Carter sat at the long steel table, hands folded neatly in front of her. Across from her sat Mitchell, his eyes hard, calculating. His partner, Davis, the silent, stocky one, stood near the door, arms crossed over his chest like a sentry. On the table between them lay a series of black and white photographs. Surveillance images. Simmons meeting with 2 men outside a nondescript warehouse on the outskirts of the city. Mitchell's finger tapped one of the photographs. This is where it starts, Mitchell said. Olivia's gaze sharpened as she studied the grainy image. The 2 men standing beside Simmons were dressed in dark suits, their faces partially hidden by the shadows. But Olivia recognized the posture, military precision. They're not locals, she said. Mitchell smiled faintly. No, they're not. Who are they? Contacts from a private security firm. Off the books. Their names are tied to classified military contracts, black ops work. Olivia's eyes darkened. Mercenaries. Highly trained, Mitchell said, and very expensive. Olivia leaned back slightly. So, Simmons isn't just working for the local boys. No, Mitchell replied. This is bigger. Davis spoke for the first time. His voice was low, calm. We believe Simmons is acting as a middleman, facilitating weapons and drugs through the police department. Olivia's gaze sharpened. Where's the supply coming from? We're still tracing that, Mitchell replied. But here's the problem. Simmons isn't working alone. Someone inside the system is protecting him. A superior? Olivia asked. Mitchell's expression hardened. More than one. We think there's a network, reaching into Homeland Security and possibly the Department of Defense. Olivia's eyes narrowed. And they sent Simmons after me because I got too close. Mitchell nodded. They wanted to see if you'd fold. They underestimated me. Mitchell smiled. Yes, they did. Olivia's gaze drifted toward the photographs. Simmons stood at the center of the frame, head tilted toward the men in suits. His posture was relaxed, comfortable, confident. What's the plan? Olivia asked. We set a trap, Mitchell replied. Olivia's brow arched. What kind of trap? Mitchell leaned forward, his gaze sharpening. We let Simmons think he's won. 12 hours later, the warehouse on the edge of the city was as bleak as it looked in the photographs. The concrete walls were cracked and stained, the windows covered with metal grates. Beyond the chain-link fence, the dull glow of streetlights flickered in the darkness. Inside, the air was thick with the scent of oil and gasoline. A row of wooden crates sat along the far wall, marked with black military-style stencils. Olivia stood at the center of the room, her posture relaxed. She wore dark jeans, a fitted leather jacket, and a thin wire beneath her shirt that connected to the concealed transmitter in her ear. You sure about this? Mitchell's voice crackled through her earpiece. I've done worse, Olivia replied softly. Through the narrow crack in the warehouse door, the distant growl of an engine echoed. Headlights cut through the night, illuminating the darkened interior of the warehouse for a brief moment before the car stopped. The metal door creaked open. Footsteps echoed against the concrete floor. Simmons walked in first, his dark leather jacket pulled tight across his shoulders. Behind him came Riley and a third man Olivia didn't recognize, tall, thin, with military tattoos running along his neck. Simmons' smile widened as his eyes swept over Olivia. Well, look at you, Simmons said. You're a hard woman to find. I wasn't hiding, Olivia replied. Simmons' gaze sharpened. So what's this about? You know why you're here, Olivia said. Simmons' smile faded. You're getting in over your head, Carter. I've been there before, Olivia replied. Simmons stepped closer. Riley and the other man flanked him. You think you could take us down? Simmons asked. I don't need to, Olivia said softly. Simmons' eyes narrowed. What's that supposed to mean? Take a look around, Olivia said. Simmons' gaze flicked toward the crates behind her. A low sound buzzed beneath the noise of the warehouse, the faint whine of an electrical pulse. Simmons' brow creased. That's a signal jammer, Olivia said. Simmons' jaw tightened. The only way you get out of here, Olivia continued, is if I let you. Simmons' smile twisted into a sneer. You've got some nerve. Do I? Simmons' hand slid toward his jacket. Don't, Olivia said. Simmons' eyes darkened. The sound of footsteps echoed through the warehouse. Mitchell and Davis stepped out of the shadows, both wearing tactical vests. The glint of metal flashed beneath their coats. Simmons' expression sharpened. This is a setup, Simmons growled. You're quick, Olivia said. Simmons' eyes flicked toward Riley and the other man. Stand down, Simmons ordered. Riley hesitated. Do it, Simmons barked. Riley stepped back, his hands raised. Simmons' jaw tightened. You've got nothing on me. Actually, Olivia said, we have quite a bit. Mitchell tossed a file onto the floor. It slid toward Simmons' feet. Phone records, Mitchell said. Financial transactions. Surveillance footage. It's all there. Simmons' gaze darkened. And there's more, Mitchell continued. The drugs you planted in Olivia's car? We matched the serial numbers to shipments coming out of a private storage facility linked to your unit. Simmons' jaw tightened. That's circumstantial. No, Olivia replied. That's evidence. Simmons' hand shifted toward his jacket. Careful, Davis said. His hand slid toward his weapon. Simmons' eyes flashed toward the exit. You've got nowhere to go, Olivia said. Simmons' breathing quickened. His hand hovered near his weapon. You think you're untouchable? Olivia said softly. I know I am, Simmons growled. I wouldn't bet on that, Olivia replied. A loud click echoed through the warehouse as Mitchell's partner released the safety on his weapon. Simmons' eyes darkened. This isn't over. No, Olivia said. It's just beginning. Simmons' hand fell away from his jacket. He turned toward Riley. We're leaving, Simmons said. I don't think so, Mitchell replied. Simmons' gaze sharpened. You don't have the authority to hold me. Mitchell's smile was cold. We do now. Davis tossed a warrant onto the floor. Simmons' eyes darkened as he recognized the official seal of the Department of Justice. You're under arrest, Olivia said. For what? Drug trafficking, bribery, evidence tampering. Simmons' eyes gleamed with fury. You can't pin that on me. You're right, Olivia said, but we can pin it on your friends. Simmons' expression hardened. This is over, Olivia said, and you lost. Simmons' smile twisted into a sneer. We'll see about that. Mitchell nodded toward Davis. Davis stepped forward. Turn around. Simmons' gaze lingered on Olivia for a long moment. Then he turned. Davis cuffed his wrists. Simmons' smile remained, cold and sharp. You think this ends with me? Simmons said. Olivia's eyes glinted. No, she said, but it starts with you. Bradley Simmons sat across from Olivia Carter, his wrists shackled to the steel table beneath the harsh fluorescent lights of the federal holding facility. His expression was cold, impassive, but his eyes burned with quiet rage. The room was small and sterile, the gray cinder-block walls offering no comfort. Olivia leaned back in her chair, arms crossed over her chest. The thin wire beneath her jacket pressed lightly against her skin, connecting her to Mitchell and Davis in the adjacent observation room. A small red light above the door blinked softly, indicating that the recording had already begun. Simmons smiled faintly. Do you think you've won? I don't think, Olivia replied evenly. I know. Simmons' smile widened. You always were cocky. Olivia's gaze sharpened. You don't know me. Simmons' eyes gleamed. I know your type. No, Olivia said softly. You don't. Simmons' hands shifted slightly against the cuffs. The chain rattled softly. I want a deal, Simmons said. Olivia's brow lifted slightly. A deal. I'll give you names, Simmons said. Dates. Financial records. Everything. In exchange for what? Immunity, Simmons replied smoothly. Olivia smiled faintly. That's not going to happen. You think you can take this all down without me? Simmons' gaze sharpened. You think you know how deep this goes? I have a good idea, Olivia said. Simmons leaned forward. No, you don't. A long silence stretched between them. Olivia's gaze never wavered. Help me understand something, Olivia said. You had a career, a clean record, a future. Simmons' smile twisted into something darker. You think I wanted this? You didn't have a problem with it, Olivia replied. Simmons' expression hardened. You don't get it, Carter. None of you do. Then explain it to me. Simmons' jaw tightened. His gaze flicked toward the ceiling for a brief moment before settling back on Olivia. I got tired of playing by the rules, Simmons said. Tired of watching guys at the top skim millions off the books while we were down in the dirt doing the real work. So you decided to skim some for yourself? Olivia replied. Simmons' smile returned. If you knew how deep the system was compromised, you would have done the same. Olivia's gaze sharpened. Who gave the order? Simmons' smile faded. Who's running it? Olivia pressed. Simmons' jaw tightened. You don't want to know. Yes, Olivia said softly. I do. Simmons' gaze darkened. There's a name, Simmons said. Bennett. Olivia's expression sharpened. Colonel Bennett? Simmons' smile widened. So you've heard of him. He's on active assignment with the Department of Defense, Olivia said. Simmons' smile deepened. Exactly. Olivia's pulse quickened. Mitchell's voice crackled in her ear. We've been tracking Bennett for months, Mitchell said. But nothing stuck. Why would Bennett care about moving drugs? Olivia asked. Simmons' smile thinned. It's not about the drugs. Then what is it about? Simmons' smile twisted. Control. Explain, Olivia pressed. Simmons' gaze sharpened. What's the biggest asset the military has? Personnel, Olivia replied. Simmons nodded. And what happens when you control the people who control the assets? Olivia's eyes narrowed. Bennett is recruiting. Not just recruiting, Simmons said. He's building an army. A chill slid down Olivia's spine. For what? Simmons' smile faded. That's what you'll have to figure out. The door opened. Mitchell and Davis stepped inside. Mitchell's expression was sharp, cold. Enough games, Mitchell said. Start talking. Already told you, Simmons replied. I want a deal. You're not getting immunity, Mitchell said. Then you're not getting names, Simmons replied. Mitchell's gaze darkened. You think you're in control? I know I am, Simmons said. Then why are you in cuffs? Olivia asked. Simmons' smile widened. Because you wanted me to be... Mitchell's eyes narrowed. Simmons leaned toward Olivia. But you've made a mistake. What mistake? Olivia asked. Simmons' smile widened. You think you're still ahead. A sharp click echoed through the room. Olivia's gaze sharpened as Simmons raised his wrists. The handcuffs slid apart. Davis's eyes widened. What the hell? Simmons smiled coldly. He pressed his hands against the edge of the table and rose to his feet. Ow, Mitchell began. Simmons reached into his jacket. Before Davis could draw his weapon, Simmons pulled out a small silver key. Mitchell's gaze darkened. Who gave you that? Simmons smiled. Bennett sends his regards. Davis's hand went for his weapon. Simmons' hand blurred toward his waist. A flash of steel. Davis fired. The shot exploded through the room, echoing off the walls. Simmons was already moving. He twisted toward Olivia. A knife gleamed in his hand. Olivia's gaze sharpened. In a single, fluid motion, Olivia's leg shot out beneath the table. Simmons' knee buckled. He stumbled forward. Olivia surged to her feet. Her hand flashed toward Simmons' wrist, twisting hard. The knife hit the floor with a sharp clang. Simmons' elbow shot toward her face. Olivia ducked. She drove her palm into his chest. Simmons hit the table hard. Mitchell's gun was already drawn. Don't move, Mitchell barked. Simmons' smile didn't fade. This isn't over. Olivia leaned down, her face inches from Simmons' ear. You're right, Olivia said. It's just beginning. 1 hour later, Mitchell paced the briefing room, his expression hard. Olivia stood near the window, her gaze focused on the night beyond the glass. Davis leaned against the wall, his shoulder bandaged. The knife had missed anything vital. Lucky. They'll come for him, Davis said. Let them, Mitchell replied. Olivia's gaze sharpened. Bennett. Mitchell nodded. If Simmons is right, if Bennett is using his military connections to build a shadow network, then this isn't just a criminal investigation. It's a coup, Olivia said. Mitchell's gaze darkened. We need proof. Olivia's jaw tightened. We have proof. Mitchell's brow lifted. What proof? Olivia turned toward him. Simmons. He's not talking, Mitchell said. Yet, Olivia replied. Mitchell's eyes narrowed. He's loyal to Bennett, Olivia said. That means Bennett trusts him. So, Mitchell asked. So, Olivia said, if we want Bennett, we use Simmons. Mitchell's gaze sharpened. You want to turn him? Olivia smiled faintly. No. Then what? Olivia's smile widened. We let him escape. Mitchell's eyes narrowed. That's risky. We need Bennett to think Simmons is still working for him, Olivia replied. We let Simmons run, and we follow him. Mitchell's jaw tightened. And if Simmons figures it out? He won't, Olivia said, because I'm going to make sure he's too scared to question it. Mitchell's gaze darkened. This could backfire. Only if we hesitate, Olivia replied. Mitchell studied her for a long moment. Then he smiled faintly. You sure about this? I've been sure since the moment Simmons pulled me over, Olivia said. Davis straightened. Then let's set the trap. Olivia's eyes gleamed. It's time to go hunting, Olivia said. The rain hammered down against the dark city streets, the glow of streetlights reflecting off the slick pavement like shattered glass. Olivia Carter sat in the passenger seat of a black SUV, the windshield wipers swiping rhythmically across the glass. Mitchell sat behind the wheel, his jaw tight, his eyes cold and calculating. Davis was in the back seat, a rifle case resting across his lap. This is a bad idea, Davis muttered. We don't have a choice, Olivia replied. Her gaze remained fixed on the warehouse in the distance, a decaying concrete structure on the edge of the city, half hidden beneath a blanket of fog. Through the thin mist, a convoy of black SUVs was already gathering near the loading docks. Men in tactical gear moved in and out of the warehouse, carrying crates marked with military serial numbers. Military-grade weapons, Mitchell said. This isn't small time. No, Olivia replied. It's not. Davis leaned forward between seats. How long until Simmons shows? He's already here, Olivia said softly. As if on cue, a black sedan pulled up to the warehouse entrance. Simmons stepped out first, adjusting his leather jacket against the rain. Behind him followed two men, the same mercenaries from the surveillance photos. Mitchell's jaw tightened. Simmons looks awfully comfortable for someone who was just arrested. That's the idea, Olivia said. You sure he doesn't know he's bait? Davis asked. If Simmons knew, he wouldn't have shown up, Olivia replied. Mitchell's eyes darkened. And if he figures it out, then I'll have to handle it, Olivia said. Through the windshield, Olivia watched as Simmons approached one of the SUVs. A figure stepped out, tall, broad-shouldered, with close-cropped silver hair and a face carved from stone. Colonel Bennett. A chill slid down Olivia's spine. That's him, Mitchell said. Olivia's gaze sharpened. Simmons led us right to him. Mitchell's hands tightened on the steering wheel. What's the play? We wait, Olivia replied. You want to let them finish the deal? Davis asked. No, Olivia said. I want to catch them in the act. Inside the warehouse, the air was thick with the smell of oil and metal. Stacks of crates lined the walls, each one marked with military shipment codes. Bennett stood at the center of the room, his hands clasped behind his back. Simmons stood in front of him, his posture tense despite the easy smile on his face. You're late, Bennett said. His voice was low-clipped. Traffic, Simmons replied smoothly. Bennett's cold gaze swept over him. And you're sure you weren't followed? Positive, Simmons said. Bennett's gaze sharpened. After that stunt you pulled at the station, you've made us vulnerable. I cleaned it up, Simmons replied. Bennett's expression hardened. Did you? Simmons' smile faltered. I don't tolerate mistakes, Bennett said. It's under control, Simmons replied. Bennett's gaze sharpened. I hope so. For your sake. Two men in tactical gear stepped forward and opened one of the crates. Inside were stacks of assault rifles, military-grade explosives, and ammunition. Bennett's eyes gleamed. And this? Shipment from Eastern Europe, Simmons replied. Direct line to the port. Clean paperwork. Untraceable. Bennett's smile was thin. Excellent. Outside, Mitchell's radio crackled. We got a signal, one of the tactical agents reported. Confirmed military hardware. Mitchell's hand tightened around the radio. Call it, Davis said. Mitchell's gaze slid toward Olivia. Olivia's eyes sharpened. Not yet. Mitchell's brow creased. They're loading the trucks. Not yet, Olivia repeated. Through the windshield, Olivia watched as Simmons reached into his jacket. Her pulse quickened, but Simmons wasn't pulling out a weapon. It was a phone. Simmons handed it to Bennett. Bennett's expression darkened. He pressed the phone to his ear. Yes, Bennett said. A long silence stretched. Bennett's gaze sharpened. His lips thinned. He lowered the phone and turned toward Simmons. Are you sure you weren't followed? Simmons' smile faltered. Bennett's gaze sharpened. Take care of it. Two of the mercenaries stepped toward Simmons. Simmons' eyes widened. Wait a second. The first mercenary grabbed Simmons by the arm. Olivia's eyes narrowed. Mitchell, Olivia said. What? Now, Olivia said. Mitchell's gaze sharpened. Team 1, Mitchell said into the radio. Go. Inside the warehouse. The sound of shattering glass cut through the air as the warehouse skylights exploded inward. Black-clad agents rappelled through the ceiling, weapons raised. Federal agents. Hands in the air. The room erupted into chaos. Bennett's men drew their weapons. Simmons stumbled backward as one of the mercenaries lunged toward him. Gunfire exploded through the warehouse. Bennett's eyes flashed toward Simmons. You set me up, Bennett growled. No, Simmons shouted. I didn't. Bennett's hand blurred toward his sidearm. Simmons' eyes widened. Bang. Bennett fired. Simmons hit the ground hard, clutching his side. Blood pooled beneath his jacket. Olivia was already moving. She vaulted over a crate and slid towards Simmons. Her hand flashed toward her sidearm. Bennett's weapon turned toward her. Bang! Olivia's shot exploded through the room. Bennett's weapon spun from his hand. Bennett's gaze sharpened. "Agent Carter," Bennett said. "Colonel Bennett," Olivia replied coldly. Bennett smiled faintly. "We could have used you." "I'm not for sale," Olivia said. Bennett's smile twisted. "Pity." Bennett's hand blurred toward his ankle. Olivia's gun was already raised. "Don't," Olivia warned. Bennett's gaze hardened. Then, slowly, his hand lowered. Mitchell stepped into the room, his weapon trained on Bennett's head. "On your knees," Mitchell ordered. Bennett smiled faintly. "This is bigger than me." "Yeah," Olivia replied. "That's why it's over." Bennett's gaze sharpened. Slowly, he lowered himself to his knees. Mitchell and Davis moved in, cuffing his hands behind his back. Olivia crouched beside Simmons. Blood seeped through his jacket. "You knew this was a trap?" Olivia said softly. Simmons' smile was faint. "Yeah." "Why'd you come?" Simmons' gaze sharpened. "Because you're the only one who could stop him," Simmons said. Olivia's brow furrowed. Simmons' hand touched hers briefly. His breathing was shallow. "I did my part," Simmons said softly. Olivia's jaw tightened. "You're not dying here," Olivia said. Simmons' smile widened faintly. "Don't make promises you can't keep." "Shut up," Olivia said. Behind her, Davis leaned over. "EMTs are on their way," Davis said. Simmons' eyes began to drift closed. "Hey," Olivia said sharply. "Stay with me." Simmons' eyes fluttered. His smile was faint. "Not bad for a dirty cop," Simmons said. Olivia's jaw tightened. "You're not done yet," Olivia said. Simmons' gaze softened. "Neither are you," Simmons replied. His hand slipped away. EMTs swarmed the room. Olivia stepped back, her chest rising and falling. Mitchell stepped beside her. "You all right?" Mitchell asked. Olivia's gaze sharpened. "It's not over," Olivia said. Mitchell's brow creased. "Bennett was the front," Olivia said. "But someone gave him his orders." Mitchell's eyes narrowed. "Who?" Olivia's gaze darkened. "That's what I'm going to find out." 3 days later, Olivia Carter stood at the edge of the tarmac at Andrews Air Force Base. The early morning air was sharp and cold, the low hum of jet engines vibrating beneath her feet. The sun was barely visible through the thin layer of gray clouds that stretched across the sky. Behind her, a sleek black Gulfstream jet sat idle, its door open, waiting. Mitchell stood a few feet away, his arms crossed over his chest, watching Olivia with quiet intensity. "He's stable," Mitchell said. Olivia's gaze didn't shift. "Simmons?" Mitchell nodded. "He made it through surgery." Olivia's jaw tightened. "Where is he now?" "Military hospital," Mitchell replied. "Under guard." Olivia's eyes narrowed. "Bennett?" Mitchell's expression darkened. "He's in federal custody." "And he's not talking?" Mitchell smiled faintly. "Not a word." "That's a problem," Olivia said. Mitchell's gaze sharpened. "We'll get what we need." "No," Olivia replied. "We won't." Mitchell's brow lifted. Olivia turned toward him. Bennett was too calm, too collected. He knew this was coming. Mitchell's smile faded. "You think he let us catch him?" "I think someone let us catch him," Olivia replied. Mitchell's gaze darkened. "You're talking about a higher chain of command." "I'm talking about the person who gave Bennett his orders," Olivia said. Mitchell's expression hardened. "You have a name?" he asked. Olivia's gaze sharpened. "I think so." 6 hours later, the elevator doors opened with a soft chime. Olivia stepped out into the marble-lined hallway of the Department of Defense's headquarters in Washington, D.C. The walls were lined with framed photographs of past military leaders, their faces etched with the gravity of responsibility. A uniformed aide approached. "Agent Carter?" "Yes," Olivia said. "The deputy secretary is waiting for you," the aide replied. Olivia followed the aide down the hall toward a large oak door guarded by 2 military police officers. The aide stepped aside as one of the guards opened the door. Inside, the office was immaculate. A massive mahogany desk sat beneath the towering window overlooking the city. The walls were lined with bookshelves and plaques. A single American flag stood in the corner. Behind the desk sat Deputy Secretary James Holloway. Holloway was a tall, broad-shouldered man in his early 60s with thinning silver hair and piercing blue eyes. His posture was relaxed, his hands resting lightly on the polished surface of his desk. "Agent Carter," Holloway said smoothly. "Please sit." Olivia remained standing. Holloway smiled faintly. "Suit yourself." Olivia's gaze sharpened. "I'm not here for small talk." "I didn't think you were," Holloway replied. Olivia stepped toward the desk. "Bennett worked for you." Holloway's smile didn't fade. "Bennett worked for a lot of people." "But you gave the orders," Olivia said. Holloway's expression remained composed. "You have proof." Olivia smiled faintly. "Do I need it?" Holloway's eyes narrowed. "You built the network," Olivia said. "Bennett was just a middleman. But you were the one pulling the strings." Holloway's smile faded. "And now that Bennett is in custody," Olivia continued, "you're worried about what he'll say." Holloway's gaze sharpened. "He won't say anything." "What?" Olivia asked. Holloway's smile returned. "Because he knows what's at stake." Olivia's gaze darkened. "You're protecting something." Holloway leaned back in his chair. "I'm protecting the country. By trafficking weapons and drugs." "To maintain balance," Holloway replied smoothly. Olivia's brow creased. "Balance?" Holloway's gaze sharpened. "You don't understand the game, Agent Carter. The world isn't black and white. It's shades of gray." "I don't care," Olivia replied. Holloway's smile widened. "Of course you do. You work for us." "I work for the country," Olivia replied coldly. "Not for you." Holloway's gaze sharpened. "You could have been part of it," Holloway said. "I still can," Olivia replied. Holloway's brow lifted. Olivia stepped toward the desk. "Give me a seat at the table." Holloway's gaze sharpened. "You're serious?" Olivia's smile was faint. "You need someone like me." Holloway studied her for a long moment. "You understand what this means?" Holloway said. "I do," Olivia replied. Holloway smiled faintly. "Then welcome aboard." 3 days later, Mitchell stood at the edge of the airstrip at Andrews Air Force Base, his hands resting on his hips. Davis stood nearby, watching as the Gulfstream jet descended toward the runway. Mitchell's gaze sharpened as Olivia stepped off the plane. "Welcome back," Mitchell said. Olivia smiled faintly. "Miss me?" "You were gone long enough," Mitchell replied. Davis stepped forward. "What happened?" Olivia's smile widened. "I got invited to the table." Mitchell's expression darkened. "What does that mean?" "It means," Olivia said, "we just moved up the chain." Mitchell's jaw tightened. "Did you make a deal?" Olivia's gaze sharpened. "Not exactly." Mitchell's brow furrowed. "Then what did you agree to?" Olivia smiled faintly. "I agreed to nothing," Olivia said. "But Holloway thinks I did." Mitchell's eyes narrowed. "You're playing him." "That's the idea," Olivia replied. Mitchell's expression darkened. "That's dangerous," Mitchell said. "I know," Olivia replied. Mitchell stepped closer. "What's the endgame?" Olivia's smile widened. "We let him think I'm loyal," Olivia said. "We get inside. We learn the structure. We dismantle it from within." Mitchell's eyes sharpened. "You think you can pull that off?" Mitchell asked. Olivia's gaze darkened. "I'm counting on it," Olivia replied. Mitchell smiled faintly. "You always were dangerous." "That's why they sent me," Olivia said. Mitchell's expression darkened. "What about Simmons?" "He's alive," Olivia replied. "And he knows what's coming." Mitchell's jaw tightened. "What's coming?" Olivia's eyes glinted. "A war," Olivia replied. 2 weeks later, Holloway's office was quiet, the soft sound of classical music drifting through the room. Holloway sat behind his desk, his hands resting on the polished surface. The phone on his desk buzzed. Holloway answered. "Yes." "It's done," a voice replied. Holloway's smile widened. "Excellent." The call ended. Holloway leaned back in his chair, his eyes gleaming. At the same moment, Olivia stood on the rooftop of a government building, her gaze fixed on the city below. The lights stretched out beneath her like a sea of stars. Mitchell stood beside her. "He took the bait," Olivia said. "You're sure?" Mitchell asked. Olivia's smile was cold. "He thinks he's using me," Olivia said. "But he's the one being played." Mitchell's eyes narrowed. "And when it's time to take him down?" Olivia's gaze sharpened. "We take everything," Olivia said. Mitchell's jaw tightened. "This could burn you," Mitchell said. "I know," Olivia replied. "And you're still going through with it?" Olivia's smile widened. "We started this," Olivia said. We're going to finish it. Mitchell's gaze sharpened. All right, Mitchell said. What's the next move? Olivia's eyes gleamed beneath the city lights. We start digging, Olivia said. And when Holloway figures it out? Mitchell asked. Olivia's smile widened. He won't, Olivia replied. Not until it's too late.